At the family party, my sister raised her glass and called me the family embarrassment. The words landed lightly, almost playfully, the way people disguise cruelty as humor when they know everyone else is watching. A few people laughed. Not loudly. Just enough to let her know she had an audience. I smiled. Then I picked up my phone and sent one message. The dining room was glowing that night, the kind of warm golden light that makes everything look softer than it really is. My nephew had rented a private space at a country club just outside the city, the kind with polished wood floors and tall windows overlooking a golf course that stretched out for acres. Everything was perfect on the surface. White tablecloths. Crystal glasses. Plates arranged like they belonged in a magazine. I had spent over an hour getting ready for this night. At 67, I don't rush things anymore. I chose a navy blue dress that fit just right, something elegant but not loud. I styled my silver hair carefully, the way my late husband used to like, and I even wore the pearl earrings he gave me on our 30th anniversary. I remember standing in front of the mirror before I left, telling myself that tonight might be different. That maybe, just maybe, things would feel like family again. When I arrived, the room was already full. Conversations overlapped in that familiar way, forks clinking against plates, glasses tapping together in small toasts. For a moment, I let myself believe I had been wrong about everything. Linda spotted me almost immediately. My older sister always had a way of commanding attention without asking for it. She was standing near the center of the room, laughing at something someone had said, her hand resting lightly on her wine glass as if she owned the space around her. "Margaret!" she called out, her voice carrying just enough to make heads turn. "You made it!" I walked toward her, smiling, keeping my posture steady. "Of course," I said. "I wouldn't miss it." She leaned in to hug me, her perfume sharp and familiar. "I was starting to think you'd find a reason not to come," she murmured, just low enough that only I could hear. I pulled back slightly, meeting her eyes. There was something there, something calculated, but it was gone before I could hold on to it. "Not tonight," I said. For the first hour, everything stayed pleasant. I spoke with my cousins, asked about their kids, listened to stories about vacations and work and things that felt normal, almost comforting. But every now and then, I caught pieces of Linda's voice drifting across the room. Little comments. Small jokes. The kind that don't sound like much on their own, but start to build when you hear enough of them. "You know Margaret," she said at one point, laughing softly. "She's always had a talent for making things more complicated than they need to be." A few people smiled politely. Someone nodded. I kept my expression neutral, lifting my glass, taking a small sip of water. It wasn't new. Linda had always been like this. Subtle. Controlled. Never loud enough to be called out, never quiet enough to be ignored. By the time dinner was served, the room had settled into that comfortable rhythm of shared meals. Plates were passed, conversations softened, and for a moment, it almost felt peaceful. I let myself relax, just slightly. That was when Linda stood up. She didn't ask for attention. She didn't need to. The room seemed to shift toward her automatically. She raised her glass, smiling in that polished, effortless way she had perfected over decades. "I just want to say something," she began, her tone light, almost affectionate. "It's not often we get everyone together like this." People murmured in agreement. A few glasses lifted in quiet anticipation. I felt it then. That subtle tightening in my chest. The kind you learn to recognize when you've known someone your whole life. "Family is important," she continued, glancing around the table. "Even when some of us—" She paused, just long enough to draw attention, to create that small moment of suspense. Then she looked directly at me. "Well," she said, smiling wider, "even when some of us have always been a bit of an embarrassment." There it was. Simple. Clean. Delivered with a smile that made it sound like a joke. The room reacted exactly the way she expected. A few laughs. Some uncomfortable shifting. One or two people looking down at their plates, pretending not to notice. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just smiled. Slowly. Carefully. The way you do when you realize something has finally crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. I picked up my phone beneath the table, my fingers steady, my expression unchanged. It took less than 10 seconds. One message. One decision. I set the phone back down beside my plate and lifted my glass, meeting her gaze across the table. Linda smiled back, confident, certain she had won something. I held that moment for just a second longer. Then I took a sip, as if nothing at all had happened. The laughter did not last long, but it lingered in a way that felt heavier than silence. It settled into the room like something unspoken, something everyone could feel but no one wanted to acknowledge. I placed my glass back on the table with steady hands and continued eating as if nothing had changed. Across from me, my cousin Daniel cleared his throat and started talking about a recent business trip, his voice slightly too loud, slightly too eager to fill the space Linda had created. A few people nodded, grateful for the distraction. Linda sat down slowly, smoothing the front of her dress, her expression calm and satisfied. She did not look at me again right away. She did not need to. She had already made her point. I noticed the small things then. The way people avoided my eyes. The way conversations shifted whenever I leaned slightly closer. The way laughter softened when I was within reach, as if I had suddenly become something fragile, something uncomfortable to handle. I had seen this before, just not this clearly. Not all at once. I reached for my napkin and adjusted it on my lap, my movements precise, controlled. My phone remained face down beside my plate. No one paid attention to it. No one noticed that anything had changed. That was the thing about moments like this. They never looked dramatic from the outside. They looked ordinary. Quiet. Almost forgettable. But inside, something had already shifted. I listened as Linda continued speaking with the people at her table, her voice light, her tone easy. She was telling another story now, something about a vacation from years ago, weaving details together in that effortless way she always had. She was good at this. Always had been. She knew exactly how to hold a room, how to guide people toward a certain version of reality without them realizing it. I used to admire that about her. When we were younger, I thought it was confidence. Strength. I did not understand yet that it was something else entirely. Something quieter. Something sharper. The waiter came by to refill water glasses, moving quickly and quietly between the tables. I thanked him with a small nod, watching as the light reflected off the surface of the glass. Everything looked so normal. That was what made it so easy for everyone else to accept. I could feel it now, the pattern unfolding in my mind with a kind of clarity I had not allowed myself before. This was not new. It had just never been this visible. I thought back to smaller moments. Comments made at birthdays. Jokes told at holidays. Little corrections, delivered with a smile, that made me question my own memory of things. Each one so small on its own that it seemed unreasonable to react. Each one easy to dismiss. Until they were not. Across the room, my niece Emily glanced at me, her expression uncertain. She opened her mouth slightly, as if she might say something, then hesitated and looked away. I did not blame her. It is difficult to step into something like this when everyone else has chosen not to see it. I picked up my fork again and finished the last few bites on my plate, tasting almost nothing. The noise of the room had returned to its usual rhythm, but it sounded different to me now. Distant. Filtered. Like I was hearing it from somewhere just outside of it. Linda laughed again, louder this time, and a few people joined in. She leaned back in her chair, completely at ease. She believed the moment had passed. That it had been absorbed into the evening like everything else. I glanced down at my phone for just a second. Still silent. That was expected. Some things take time. Some truths do not arrive all at once. I folded my napkin carefully and placed it beside my plate. My movements were slow, deliberate. There was no reason to rush. Not anymore. I leaned back slightly in my chair, allowing myself to observe instead of participate. That was new. For years, I had been part of this rhythm, adjusting myself to fit into it, smoothing over discomfort, telling myself that family was worth the effort. That some things were better left alone. I understood something different now. Silence does not protect you. It only teaches people how far they can go. I looked at Linda again, really looked this time, without the layer of habit that had always softened my view of her. She was still smiling, still surrounded by people who saw her exactly the way she wanted to be seen. That had always been her greatest strength. And her greatest weakness. I reached for my glass once more, lifting it just slightly, not in a toast, not as a gesture, but simply because I could. Because I was still here. Because I had not left. Not yet. The room continued around me, unaware that something had already begun to unravel beneath its surface. And for the first time in a very long time, I did not feel the need to stop it. I did not check my phone again, not right away. That was part of it. The waiting. The quiet space between action and consequence. Around me, the room continued to breathe in that steady, comfortable rhythm, as if nothing had changed. Plates were cleared, desserts were brought out, and someone at the far end of the table began telling a story about a fishing trip that had gone wrong in a way that made everyone laugh. I listened without really hearing, my attention drifting in and out like a tide. It was strange how quickly a place could feel unfamiliar. This room, these people, these conversations I had been part of for years, suddenly felt like something I was observing from a distance. I was no longer inside it the way I used to be. I was outside, watching it unfold. Emily stood up a few seats away, excusing herself quietly. She walked past me on her way toward the hallway, her hand brushing lightly against the back of my chair. It was a small gesture, almost accidental, but it carried something else with it. Hesitation. Awareness. I caught her eye for just a second, and she gave me a look I had not seen before. Not pity. Not exactly. Something closer to recognition. Then she kept walking. I turned my attention back to the table just as a soft vibration echoed faintly against the polished wood. It was not mine. It came from somewhere to my left. Daniel paused mid-sentence, glancing down at his phone with a slight frown. He picked it up, his thumb moving across the screen, and for a moment his expression did not change. Then it did. It was subtle. A tightening around the eyes. A shift in posture. He did not say anything, but he did not laugh at his own story either. The conversation faltered slightly, then continued, though it felt less steady now. A few seconds later, another vibration. This one from the other side of the table. My cousin Laura glanced at her phone, her brows pulling together, as she read something quickly, then again more slowly. She looked up, her gaze moving instinctively across the table until it landed on Linda. She held it there for a second too long before looking away. Linda noticed. Of course she did. She always noticed everything. "Everything okay?" she asked lightly, tilting her head just enough to appear concerned. Laura hesitated, then smiled in that polite, practiced way people do when they are not ready to say what they are thinking. "Yes," she said. "Just a message." Linda nodded, satisfied for the moment, and reached for her glass. But the ease in her posture had shifted, just slightly. It was still there, still convincing, but no longer effortless. The next vibration came from closer to her this time. Someone behind her, one of the younger cousins, glanced down at their phone and let out a small, confused breath. "Wait," he said quietly, not meaning to draw attention but doing so anyway. "Is this real?" The question hung in the air longer than it should have. Conversation slowed. Forks paused halfway to plates. The room did not go silent, not completely, but something underneath it all changed. I kept my gaze on my glass, tracing the rim lightly with my finger, as if I had not noticed anything at all. Linda turned slightly in her chair, her attention sharpening now. "What is it?" she asked, her voice still calm, but with an edge that had not been there before. No one answered her right away. That was new. Usually, someone would have filled that space for her, offered an explanation, smoothed things over. But this time, people were looking at their phones. Reading. Processing. Choosing their reactions carefully. I heard another soft vibration, then another. It spread quietly, like something moving beneath the surface of still water. I did not need to look to know what they were seeing. I already knew every word. I had chosen them carefully. Not emotional. Not exaggerated. Just clear. Simple. Verifiable. The kind of truth that does not need to raise its voice. Linda shifted again, this time more noticeably. She set her glass down a little too quickly, the base tapping against the table with a sharp, clean sound. "Someone want to tell me what is going on?" she asked, a hint of impatience slipping through. Daniel looked up at her then, his expression different now. Not amused. Not neutral. Something closer to uncertain. "Linda," he said slowly, "did you send this?" She blinked once, her composure holding, but just barely. "Send what?" she replied. He turned his phone slightly, not enough for everyone to see, just enough for her. Her eyes moved across the screen. I watched the exact moment it registered. It was not dramatic. There was no sudden reaction, no visible shock. Just a pause. A fraction of a second where everything behind her eyes shifted. Then she smiled. "I have no idea what that is," she said lightly, waving a hand as if dismissing it. "Probably some kind of misunderstanding." But the room did not return to normal this time. It stayed suspended, caught between what had been said and what could no longer be ignored. I finally lifted my gaze, not to confront, not to challenge, but simply to observe. For years I had been part of the silence that protected her. Tonight, that silence was breaking on its own. And I did not need to say a single word. No one laughed this time. The shift was quiet, but it was undeniable. It settled over the table like a change in temperature, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. Linda's smile remained in place, but it no longer reached her eyes. She glanced around the table, measuring reactions, searching for something she could still control. "Seriously," she said, letting out a small, dismissive laugh. "What is everyone looking at like that?" Her tone was light, but there was a tightness underneath it now, something that had not been there before. Daniel did not answer right away. He looked down at his phone again, then back up at her, as if confirming what he had just read. "It says you transferred the funds," he said carefully, his voice lower now, more deliberate. "From Aunt Margaret's account. Years ago." The words were not loud, but they carried. They landed on the table with a weight that could not be brushed aside. Linda's expression held for a fraction of a second, then shifted into something softer, almost amused. "That is ridiculous," she replied, shaking her head gently. "I have no idea what that message is talking about." But the room did not accept it the way it once would have. Laura was still looking at her phone, her lips pressed together. "There are documents attached," she said quietly. "Statements. Dates. It looks official." Linda turned toward her, the movement just a little too quick. "Laura, you know how easy it is to fake things like that," she said, her voice still smooth, but sharper now. "Anyone could put something together and send it around." Another vibration sounded, then another. Phones continued to light up across the table. Each new notification pulled more attention away from Linda and toward the screens in people's hands. The room was no longer focused on her. That, more than anything, seemed to unsettle her. I remained still, my hands folded lightly in front of me, my posture relaxed. I had imagined this moment many times, though not exactly like this. I had thought there might be anger. Raised voices. Accusations thrown back and forth. But this was different. Quieter. More precise. The kind of unraveling that happens not through confrontation, but through recognition. Emily returned to the table, her steps slower this time. She paused beside her chair, looking down at her phone, then up at Linda, then at me. She did not sit right away. "Aunt Linda," she said softly, "why is Grandma's name on these transfers?" The question was simple. Direct. There was no accusation in her voice, only confusion. That made it harder to dismiss. Linda's composure flickered. Just for a second. I handled some things for your grandmother before she passed, she said quickly. That is all this is. Routine. You are reading too much into it. But the explanation did not land cleanly. It felt rehearsed, incomplete. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the edge of the table. Then why does it show the money moving into your account? He asked. There was no hostility in his tone, just a steady insistence. The kind that does not let things go. Linda opened her mouth, then closed it again. She reached for her glass, took a small sip, buying herself a moment. Because I was managing it, she said finally. For the family. For all of us. The words hung there, waiting to be accepted. No one spoke. No one nodded. The silence stretched, not empty, but full. Full of questions that had not been asked before. Full of connections being made in real time. I watched it happen without moving. For years I had been the one trying to keep things smooth, to protect the idea of family even when it came at my own expense. I had explained away moments that did not feel right. I had told myself that intentions mattered more than outcomes. That misunderstandings could happen. That trust should be given freely. I did not believe that anymore. Linda set her glass down again, more carefully this time. This is exactly what I mean, she said, letting out a small sigh, as if she were the one being inconvenienced. Things get taken out of context, and suddenly it becomes something it is not. Her eyes flicked toward me then, just briefly. It was the first time she had acknowledged me since the room began to shift. There was a question in that glance. A calculation. She still did not know. Not completely. That was the part she had not accounted for. I met her gaze calmly, offering nothing in return. No explanation. No reaction. Just stillness. Around us, the room remained suspended in that new, unfamiliar space. Conversations had stopped completely now. Even the staff moving through the room seemed quieter, as if they sensed something had changed. Daniel looked down at his phone one more time, then back up. There is more, he said, his voice steady. It goes back years. This is not just one thing. Linda did not respond immediately. For the first time that evening, she did not have a quick answer ready. The confidence that had carried her through the night was still there, but it was thinner now. Fragile in a way it had never been before. I reached for my glass again, lifting it slowly, my movements unhurried. I did not need to speak. The truth had already found its way into the room. And it was not leaving. The air in the room felt thinner now, as if something essential had been quietly removed. No one reached for their dessert. No one continued their conversations. Even the soft music playing in the background seemed out of place, too light for what had settled over the table. Linda sat very still, her fingers resting lightly against the stem of her glass, but she was no longer relaxed. There was a stiffness in her shoulders now, a careful control that had replaced her earlier ease. This is getting out of hand, she said finally, her voice measured, but no longer warm. Someone is clearly trying to cause confusion. No one answered her. That silence said more than any argument could have. Laura glanced down at her phone again, then slowly turned it toward Daniel. Look at the dates, she whispered. They matched the time Aunt Margaret said she had trouble accessing her account. Daniel nodded slightly, his expression tightening as he read. And the signatures, he added. They are consistent across multiple documents. Emily lowered herself into her seat, her movements slower now, more deliberate. Why would anyone make this up? She asked quietly, not looking at anyone in particular. It was a simple question, but it landed with weight. Linda let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but it lacked any real amusement. People make things up all the time, she said. You would be surprised what can be fabricated these days. But even as she spoke, her voice carried less certainty. It was not convincing anymore. Not the way it used to be. I watched her carefully, noticing the small cracks forming beneath the surface. The way her eyes moved more quickly now, scanning the room instead of holding it. The way her posture shifted, just slightly, as if she were no longer completely grounded. For years, she had been the one directing the narrative, guiding what people saw and how they understood it. Tonight, that control was slipping. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "This is not just one message," he said. "Everyone here received the same thing." He paused, letting that settle. "That is not confusion. That is intentional." The word intentional seemed to echo, even though no one repeated it. It carried with it an implication that could not be easily dismissed. Linda's hand tightened slightly around her glass. "So now we are just going to believe an anonymous message over family?" she asked, her tone sharpening. "Over me?" That was the first time she had framed it that way. Not as a misunderstanding. Not as an error. But as a choice. Believe her, or believe what they were seeing. The room did not respond the way she expected. No one rushed to reassure her. No one immediately defended her. Instead, there was hesitation. Thought. Consideration. The kind that comes when people begin to question something they have always accepted without looking too closely. I could feel the shift deepen. It was no longer just about the documents. It was about everything those documents represented. Patterns. History. Moments that had never quite made sense before, now lining up in a way that could not be ignored. Emily looked up again, her eyes moving between Linda and the others. "I remember," she said slowly. "Grandma mentioning something about missing statements. She thought it was just a bank error." Laura nodded faintly. "She did say that," she agreed. "We all told her not to worry." Linda shook her head, a quick, dismissive movement. "You are connecting things that are not related," she said. "This is exactly how rumors start." But her words no longer carried the same authority. They felt like they were being placed into the room rather than shaping it. I remained silent, my presence steady but unobtrusive. This was not something I needed to push. It was unfolding on its own, guided by the weight of what could no longer be unseen. Daniel exhaled slowly, then looked directly at Linda. "Then explain it," he said. Not aggressively. Not accusing. Just plainly. "Help us understand." That was the moment everything changed. Not because of what was said, but because of what could not be said in return. Linda opened her mouth, then paused. For the first time that evening, there was no immediate answer waiting behind her expression. No polished explanation ready to smooth things over. Just a brief, unmistakable hesitation. It was small. Barely noticeable. But in a room that had been built on certainty, it was enough. I lowered my gaze to my hands, resting calmly in front of me. My breathing was even. My posture relaxed. From the outside, I was simply another person sitting at the table, watching the conversation unfold. But inside I understood exactly what was happening. This was not confrontation. This was exposure. And exposure does not need noise. It only needs time. Around us, the room remained still, suspended in that fragile space where truth and denial meet. No one moved to end it. No one tried to redirect it. They were waiting now. Waiting for something real. And for the first time in a very long time, Linda was the one who did not know what to say. The silence stretched just long enough to become uncomfortable. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just present. Linda shifted in her chair again, her fingers tapping lightly against the side of her glass, a small movement she probably did not even realize she was making. It was the kind of habit that only showed when control started to slip. "There is nothing to explain," she said finally, her voice firmer now, as if saying it with more certainty would make it true. "I helped manage things when no one else stepped up. That is all." Daniel did not move. "Then the record should reflect that clearly," he replied. His tone had not changed, but there was a steadiness to it now that had not been there before. Not confrontation. Just refusal to look away. Linda let out a small breath through her nose, her patience thinning. You are reading pieces of information without context, she said. That is dangerous. The word dangerous hung there, but it did not carry the weight she intended. It sounded more like a warning than an explanation. Emily glanced at Laura again, then back at her phone. There are notes attached, she said quietly. Descriptions. Transfers labeled as personal reimbursements. She hesitated. But they are not small amounts. No one needed to ask how much. The tone in her voice was enough. Linda's eyes flicked toward her, sharper now. Emily, you do not understand how financial management works, she said, her voice tightening. There are expenses, adjustments, things that need to be handled behind the scenes. But even as she spoke, the room was no longer receiving her words the same way. They were not being absorbed. They were being examined. I sat still, my hands resting lightly against the edge of the table, my breathing even. This was the part most people never see. The moment when a story stops holding. When the explanation that once worked begins to sound like something else entirely. Something rehearsed. Something incomplete. Laura leaned forward slightly, her eyes still on her screen. These are not adjustments, she said, almost to herself. They are repeated. Over years. She looked up then, her expression no longer uncertain. Why would it keep happening the same way? Linda did not answer right away. She reached for her glass again, but this time her hand paused just before touching it, as if she had forgotten what she was about to do. Because that is how accounts are maintained, she said, but the words came slower now, less fluid. There is consistency in record keeping. Daniel shook his head slightly. Not like this, he said. Not without documentation that supports it. Another quiet vibration passed through the table. Someone else had just opened the message. Another set of eyes reading the same lines, seeing the same patterns. It spread without effort now. No one needed to announce it. The awareness moved from one person to another, silent but undeniable. I could see it in the way they looked at her. Not openly accusing. Not yet. But no longer accepting. Linda noticed it too. That was the part she could not control. Not the documents. Not the message. The perception. The shift in how she was being seen. So this is what we are doing now? She asked, her voice lifting slightly, a hint of frustration breaking through. We are going to sit here and question everything based on something that appeared out of nowhere. No one rushed to reassure her. No one said she was right. The absence of support was louder than any accusation could have been. Emily lowered her phone slowly. It did not appear out of nowhere, she said. It connects to things we have already seen. We just did not put it together before. That was it. The sentence that changed everything. Not because it accused, but because it acknowledged. It named what had been happening all along. The pattern. The overlooked moments. The quiet inconsistencies that had been easier to ignore than to question. Linda's posture straightened, her shoulders pulling back as if she could restore the space she had lost simply by standing firmer within it. You are all making assumptions, she said, her voice sharper now. Serious ones. Daniel met her gaze without hesitation. Then clarify them, he said. Again. The same request. Simple. Direct. Unavoidable. Linda's lips parted slightly, then pressed together. The answer did not come. Not immediately. Not the way it used to. I lowered my eyes briefly, not to avoid the moment, but to let it unfold without interference. For years I had stepped in at moments like this. Softened things. Redirected conversations. Protected the idea of harmony even when it came at a cost. I did not move now. I did not speak. I did not offer her a way out. The room held its breath, waiting. Not for conflict. Not for drama. Just for something real. And for the first time in a very long time, Linda had nothing ready to give. No one tried to change the subject anymore. The room had moved past that point. It was no longer about saving the evening or protecting appearances. It was about understanding something that had been hidden in plain sight for years. Linda sat perfectly still now, her earlier movements gone, replaced by a kind of rigid composure that felt more like effort than control. Her eyes moved from one face to another, searching, measuring, calculating. She was trying to find the angle that would restore the balance she had always maintained. But the balance was already gone. "You are all forgetting something," she said slowly, her voice quieter now but more deliberate. "I have been the one handling things when no one else wanted to. I stepped in when it was needed." The words were familiar. They sounded like something she had said before, something that had worked before. But tonight they landed differently. Daniel leaned forward slightly again, his gaze steady. "That is not what this shows," he said. "This shows money being moved in ways that were never explained." Linda's lips tightened. "Explained to who?" she asked. "Do you think every detail needs to be discussed at a dinner table?" Laura shook her head gently. "Not every detail," she said, "but enough so that it makes sense. This does not." Emily looked down at her phone again, scrolling slowly, reading more carefully now. "There are notes from the bank," she said. "Requests for clarification that were never answered." She looked up, her voice softer. "Grandma tried to ask about it." That sentence settled into the room with a quiet weight. I closed my eyes for just a second, not to escape the moment, but to acknowledge it. I remembered those conversations. The uncertainty in her voice. The way she had second-guessed herself, wondering if she had simply misunderstood something. I had told her not to worry. I had trusted that things were being handled properly. That trust had not been misplaced. It had been used. Linda shifted in her seat again, her composure tightening further. "Your grandmother was confused at times," she said carefully. "You all know that. It is not fair to take those moments and turn them into something else." The room did not accept that either. Not the way it once would have. The difference was subtle, but it was there. People were no longer looking for reasons to agree with her. They were listening for what was missing. Daniel exhaled slowly, then set his phone down on the table, face up. "This is not about confusion," he said. "This is about consistency. The same pattern. Over and over again." Linda glanced at the phone, then quickly looked away, as if refusing to give it more attention would somehow reduce its importance. "Patterns can be interpreted in many ways," she replied. "It depends on what you are looking for." I watched her closely, seeing something I had never allowed myself to see before. Not just the confidence. Not just the control. But the effort behind it. The constant adjustment. The careful positioning of every word, every reaction. It had always been there. I had just never named it. The waiter approached the table quietly, hesitating for a moment as he sensed the tension, then asked softly if anyone needed anything. No one answered. He nodded and stepped away just as quietly as he had come. Even that small interruption felt significant, like a reminder that the world outside this moment was still moving, even as everything here had slowed to a near standstill. Emily placed her phone down beside her plate, her fingers lingering on it for a moment before pulling away. "There are emails too," she said. "Requests from the bank asking for confirmation on transfers. They were all answered from the same address." She paused, then added, "Your address." Linda did not respond immediately. Her eyes moved toward Emily, then to Daniel, then to Laura, as if searching for someone who would dismiss it, who would say it did not matter. No one did. The room remained steady, waiting. Not pushing. Not accusing. Just holding the space open. I realized then that this was the moment she had always avoided. Not confrontation. Not anger. But clarity. The kind that does not raise its voice, does not argue, does not demand. It simply remains undeniable. Linda straightened slightly, drawing in a controlled breath. "I have done nothing wrong," she said. The words were clear, but they did not carry the same certainty as before. They sounded like something she needed to say, rather than something she believed would be accepted. Daniel nodded once, slowly. Then it should be easy to show that, he replied. Again, the same request. Not aggressive. Not emotional. Just consistent. I remained still, my presence quiet but steady. I had not spoken since the moment this began. I did not need to. Everything that needed to be seen was already in front of them. Everything that needed to be understood was unfolding without my voice. Linda looked at me then, fully this time. Not a glance. Not a calculation. A direct look. There was something different in it now. Not confidence. Not control. Something closer to uncertainty. Maybe even realization. I met her gaze without changing my expression. There was nothing left to hide. Not for me. The room held that moment between us for a second longer, then shifted again, not back to what it had been, but forward into something else entirely. Something that could not be undone. The room did not break into chaos. It did not erupt into arguments or raised voices. It stayed quiet, almost unnaturally so, as if everyone understood that whatever happened next would matter more if it unfolded slowly. Linda was still looking at me, but something in her gaze had changed. It was no longer searching for control. It was searching for certainty, and not finding it. She turned away first. Just slightly. Just enough to break the moment. This is not how things are handled, she said, her voice steadier than before but lacking its earlier authority. If there are questions, they should be addressed properly. Not like this. No one disagreed. But no one supported her either. That space in between was where everything was happening now. Daniel glanced down at his phone again, then tapped the screen once, as if opening something new. There is a response, he said quietly. Several heads lifted at once. From the bank, he added. They confirmed the inquiry was reopened last week. Linda's hand tightened again, this time not on her glass but on the edge of the table. It was subtle, but visible. That does not prove anything, she said quickly. Banks reopen inquiries all the time. Laura shook her head slightly, still reading. It says the account holder initiated it, she replied. Not a third party. That detail settled into the room like a final piece finding its place. I felt the shift again, deeper this time. The difference between suspicion and confirmation. Between wondering and knowing. Emily leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. But Grandma is gone, she said. So who? She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. The answer was already there, forming quietly in the space between them. Linda exhaled slowly, her composure thinning further. This is speculation, she insisted. You are all jumping to conclusions based on incomplete information. But the room was no longer moving with her. It was moving around her. That was the difference. Conversations were not following her lead anymore. They were forming independently, connecting details she could no longer control. Daniel set his phone down again, this time pushing it slightly toward the center of the table. Not aggressively. Just enough for others to see. The signature matches, he said. Across all documents. Including the latest response. Linda did not look at it. She kept her gaze forward, her posture fixed, as if refusing to acknowledge it would somehow keep it from becoming real. I watched her carefully, recognizing something in that stillness. Not strength. Not anymore. Resistance. The kind that comes when there are no more explanations left to offer. Emily reached out slowly, turning the phone just enough to glance at the screen. Her expression changed again, this time more clearly. Not confusion. Not uncertainty. Something closer to understanding. It is consistent, she said softly. All of it. Laura nodded faintly, her eyes still on her own screen. The dates, the amounts, the responses. It all lines up. Linda let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, but it did not carry any lightness. Of course it lines up, she said. That is how records are kept. But the words no longer held. They fell into the room without landing. No one picked them up. No one repeated them. They simply faded. I remained still, my hands resting where they had been all along. This was the part one had not fully imagined. Not the exposure itself, but the way it would be received. Not with outrage. Not with confrontation. But with quiet acknowledgement. The kind that cannot be undone once it settles. Daniel leaned back slightly, his gaze steady, no longer questioning but considering. Then there should be nothing to worry about, he said. It was not a challenge. It was a conclusion. Linda did not respond immediately. Her eyes moved again, this time not scanning for control, but searching for something else entirely. Support. Reassurance. Familiar ground. But it was not there. The room had shifted too far. Too many pieces had come together. Too many small details had aligned into something larger than any single explanation could undo. Emily looked at me then, just for a moment. There was no question in her eyes anymore. Only recognition. She understood now. Not just what had happened, but how long it had been happening. I met her gaze briefly, then looked back down at the table. There was nothing I needed to confirm. Nothing I needed to explain. The truth had already moved through the room, settling into each person differently, but landing all the same. Linda finally spoke again, her voice quieter now, almost measured. "This conversation is not appropriate for tonight," she said. "We can address this later properly." It sounded like an attempt to regain structure. To move the moment out of this space and into one she could better control. But no one moved. No one agreed. The moment stayed exactly where it was. Present. Unresolved. And fully seen. I lifted my glass one more time, taking a small sip, my movements unchanged. From the outside, nothing about me had shifted. But everything around me had. And for the first time in years, I was not the one adjusting to it. No one stood up. No one reached for their coat. The evening did not end the way it was supposed to. It simply changed shape. The plates remained where they were, half-finished desserts untouched, glasses still catching the soft light from above. But the room itself felt different now. Not broken. Not chaotic. Just clear. Linda's words about handling things later did not move anyone. They settled and disappeared, like everything else she had said in the last few minutes. For the first time in as long as I could remember, her voice did not guide the direction of the room. It only existed inside it. Daniel leaned back slowly, his hands resting on the table, his expression no longer questioning, no longer uncertain. He was not looking for answers anymore. He was processing what he already had. Laura sat still, her phone face down now, as if she no longer needed to look at it to understand what it contained. Emily's eyes moved once more between Linda and me, but there was no confusion left in them. Only a quiet, settled awareness. Linda remained seated, her posture still upright, still composed in appearance, but something essential had shifted. The effort it took to hold that composure was visible now. It showed in the way her shoulders stayed slightly tense, in the way her hands remained still not out of ease, but out of control. She looked at the table, not at anyone in particular, as if recalibrating, searching for a way to step back into a position that no longer existed. I watched her for a moment, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with a kind of calm distance I had never allowed myself before. For years I had measured my place in this family through her reactions, her words, her subtle approvals and quiet dismissals. I had adjusted myself to maintain something that I thought was balance. Tonight, I understood it had never been balance. It had been control. And control, once seen clearly, does not return to what it was. I reached for my napkin and folded it slowly, placing it beside my plate. The movement was small, almost insignificant, but it marked something for me. An ending. Not of the evening, but of something much older. Linda finally spoke again, her voice softer now, more contained. "This is not settled," she said. It was not a question. Not a request. Just a statement. But it did not carry authority. It sounded like something said out of habit, not conviction. Daniel nodded once, slowly. No, he replied. It is not. He did not add anything else. He did not need to. The meaning was already there. Laura exhaled quietly, her gaze moving across the table as if seeing everyone differently now. We will need to look into this properly, she said. Again, not dramatic. Not emotional. Just clear. Emily did not speak, but she did not look away either. She stayed present in the moment, fully aware of what it meant. Linda turned her head slightly, finally looking at me again. There was no performance left in her expression. No careful shaping of words. Just a direct, unfiltered look. It lasted only a second, but it was enough. For the first time, there was no distance between what she was thinking and what she showed. And for the first time, I did not feel the need to respond to it. I stood up slowly, my chair moving back with a soft sound against the floor. The movement drew a few quiet glances, but no one spoke. I picked up my purse, smoothing the strap over my shoulder, my hands steady. Margaret, Linda said, her voice catching slightly, as if she were about to say something more. I paused, but I did not turn back right away. Not out of hesitation. Just out of choice. Then I looked at her. Calmly. Fully. I just thought everyone deserved the truth, I said. The words were simple. They did not carry weight on their own. But in that room, at that moment, they were enough. I did not wait for a response. I did not need one. I turned and walked toward the exit, my steps even unhurried. The sound of the room remained behind me, quiet, contained, still processing what had unfolded. No one stopped me. No one called after me again. The door opened easily, the cooler air from outside meeting me as I stepped through. For a moment, I paused just beyond it, taking in a slow breath. The night was still. The lights from the building cast long reflections across the parking lot, stretching out in clean, steady lines. I walked forward, the sound of my steps the only thing breaking the quiet. Behind me, the room continued without me. But it was no longer the same room I had entered. And I was no longer the same person who had sat at that table, waiting to be seen.